The Knowledge Panel Show, Episode 15, International SEO. The Knowledge Panel is brought to you by Inlinks, the entity-based SEO platform that helps you rank higher and stay ranked longer. Try Inlinks over at inlinks.net. Hi there, I'm your temporary host, David Bain. Dixon's away for this month, but he'll be back bright and breezy for October's episode. So today we are focusing in on what it takes to be a success with international SEO in 2021. And joining me to discuss that are three fantabulous panelists. Starting off with Aleyda, who was European Search Personality of the Year in 2018. She's spoken at over 100 conferences in both English and Spanish, and she's founder of the results-driven SEO consultancy Orainti. Welcome, Aleyda Solis.
Hello, how are you, David? It's a pleasure to be here today.
Yeah, very good. Thank you for joining us. Great to have you on here. So next up is a lady who has been successful in international SEO for the past 25 years. She specializes in helping big brands in the US and Europe enter the Japanese marketplace. And she's the founder of AJPR. Hello and welcome to Motoko Hunt.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me. Last, and hopefully not least, is a gentleman who's approaching a quarter of a century in the digital marketing industry himself. He's global managing director of SEM International, offering multilingual digital marketing services for brands and agencies. Welcome, Michael Bonfils.
Thank you. I should have like an old man voice after that. Thank you.
I think you've got one.
I do a little bit because of my coughing. Yeah.
That's all right. Okay, I'll try and make your voice sound younger in the post-edit. Listen to the audio version, everyone. So let's start off with talking about the state of Google from an international search perspective, because I think a lot of SEOs can't see past optimizing for Google, and they think it's only sufficient, I guess, just to optimize for Google. So, Aleyda, shall we start off with you? Do you think it's ever sufficient to just think of Google, or should you always be thinking of other search engines as well?
Oh, I love the typical SEO answer, right? It depends. It depends actually on your own business capacity and goals. And of course, if you have set as a goal to enter the Chinese market because of business goals that you really need to accomplish, of course, then Google will definitely not be enough. The same with South Korea, for example, then Google won't be enough. So it depends on which are your target markets, which are, and I have to say that for smaller companies, SEO can be one of the inputs to take into consideration how easy it is to actually have organic search visibility in that market and to drive traffic and revenue, depending on how reliant on organic search is that business, right? So I have definitely helped, especially for startups, right, to do that assessment. But if you have already a very well-established brand that is all over the world, and you know very well that you want to be in certain markets where Google is not yet the main player, then you really definitely will need to set presence in other search engines, right? So the answer will be, it depends on your goals and requirements, right? And how used Google is in that market. I have to say that Google has started to even start to be used much more in the last few years in markets where there were other local search engines, like in Russia, right? Yandex was still a few years ago the main player, but it will highly depend. So, for example, Motoko can talk definitely more regarding Japan, but it depends on your market, right? For the Western world, in any case, yes, Google is enough, but there are certain countries, China, South Korea, potentially Japan now, that the game is definitely different, right?
So, Motoko, for maybe then broadening out the question a little bit, from a website that wants to compete in different countries, is it ever, from that perspective, enough just to focus on Google? Or when you start to think about more than one country, is it always necessary to think of different search engines?
Yeah, so, definitely Google is, the most popular in many countries, including, Japan and even South Korea now, that Google is the, have the market share, bigger market share than Naver. But when you just start to optimizing just for the Google, and then now the Google say that they can crawl the JavaScripts, no problem. So you start putting all kinds of links and important information in the JavaScripts. And then when you start to use that same website structures, and then the web-based templates, and then try to target Baidu in China, Baidu doesn't crawl the JavaScript, so you're not going to do well. So step back. If you already know you're going to include, your business will include Naver in Korea and then Baidu in China, then your whole design, website design, should be thinking about what we need to do to optimize for Baidu or Naver at the same time, unless you are willing to create a different website for China, different website for Korea, using different, the codings and the designs. But if you want to use the one website structures and it just copied onto, and then push it out to the China and Korea and in Japan and everywhere else, you really should think about before you even start, designing the website. As far as the market share goes, or which target, which search engines to target, I think even in the Naver in Korea or Yandex in Russia, even though they might not be the number one search engines anymore, they still have the good portion of the market share, right? Even in the States, I think the Microsoft still has like 20 to 25% of the market share. So they might not be number one, but if you ignore the 25% of the audience, that's a pretty good business opportunity. You're just completely ignoring. So I think it's important to not focus too much on a Google. Make sure that your business is, the online business is including all of the other secondary or another important search engines. I think that's one of the easier way to grow your business. You're trying to do 100% well in a Google, but if Google is still only 75% of the market share or 50% of the market share, then you're missing out a huge opportunity in that country. So I think that focusing too much on the Google can be a huge missed opportunity for the businesses.
So Michael, Motoko actually touched upon the fact that actually having decent web experience is essential for different search engines, and different search engines require different things. Does this mean that ultimately, if you're targeting China or a country like that, then you're better off designing a website specifically for that country? Or is it possible to actually have an experience that is logical and flows nicely between different country websites on the same domain?
That's a great question, and Aleyda brought this up as well. It depends on your goals. So if we take a look at Naver, let me talk about Naver and Russia, Yandex. Okay, so Naver and Yandex, both of them are very language, cultural based search engines, or even portals, it'd be fair to say. On Naver, for example, Naver, when you're a Korean, when you try to search for something organically on Naver, it isn't as easy as you might think. It's not like Google. You actually end up with lots of ads. You end up with lots of forums. You might find a tiny little organic block of organic SEO within a massive amount of results. That doesn't mean that you don't optimize for it, but it also means that, okay, am I getting into Korea? And if I'm getting into Korea, am I really going after the language and the culture based on my product? If I'm B2B, maybe Google Korea is a lot better for you. And a lot of a lot of Korean businessmen will probably use Google for deeper searches. They may not find good results on Naver, but if you're selling a cosmetic product in South Korea, maybe Naver is a better place for you to also have optimization. So, that's what you have to think of. And if you think of Yandex, Yandex too, Yandex is it's built around the Russian language, and it's built around regions and the local markets. A lot of people, if you look at if you ever use Yandex Metrica or any other analytic package, you'll see a lot of flow between users that jump from Yandex to Google constantly, because they're constantly looking for different results. If I want to find out why my heating went out in my building in Russia, I'm going to use Yandex. If I want to find out, what's the best running shoes of the day, I'll probably jump onto Google. So, the users are moving back and forth between the two constantly. In those cases, why would you? Oh, again, it probably works exactly like Aleyda said. I mean, why would you create a website that doesn't capture both Google, Russia, and Yandex together, unless, of course, you are very, very specific to the language and culture with your product. Baidu is a different beast because you don't have the Google competitor in that market. You don't really have that much of any competitor in China. So that's a different topic altogether.
So we've mentioned Naver, Yandex, Baidu there. Those are three of the main search engines in other countries. Is it worthwhile maybe focusing in on those search engines just a little bit and just talking about the specs that are required to optimize more effectively for those search engines? Maybe things like optimizing any snippets that appear in search results, or what those search engines specifically are looking for when they're crawling your site. Maybe going back to Aleyda, which search engine would you like to choose to focus on in terms of why it's different?
Well, I would say Google, actually.
Okay.
You know what? Realistically, because honestly, if you're reaching 90% of the countries of the world, you will still optimizing with Google and for Google. But the biggest mistake that I see that people do when optimizing with Google and for Google as a main search engine in Latin America, in Europe, or in other markets that are not the US, is to assume that they can pretty much continue to do what they do for the US and just to translate. Sometimes that is a big mistake, like just to extrapolate the already existing URL structure that they have in the US to Spanish, and thinking that they will rank automatically well for Latin America, right? That is a big mistake, right? So I will even start with a very big use case that I will say is one of the biggest mistakes in international SEO that I see, right? They literally need to not assume that Google has the same level of sophistication or search features that they have in the US in all of these other markets, because they don't. So, for example, I have clients that are leveraging a lot of FAQs or HiQ or how-to type of clicks because of the highest click-through rate that these sort of snippets provide in US search results. And that will be a very lost investment if they try to do that for the Mexican version or their Colombian version, because Google is not showing those snippets, at least in those instances of those queries that they are ranking for, they are targeting. So again, trying to assume that what is already working for you in US SERPs or in your current SERPs is just translating the content and even localizing. So you think, oh, it has been a native speaker, whatever. I'm going to extrapolate exactly the same pages with the same sort of technical optimizations, etc., and assume that it will rank in the best possible way in that market. That is a big mistake. So, and then another very big mistake is thinking that Google will have the same level of sophistication, identifying link spam, for example, and ranking certain type of pages or not in certain markets. So it's very reasonable if you think about it, right? Go to a search result and again, in Colombia, and I'm not even going to very niche, smaller countries in Central America, right? That is even worse. But if you go to search results in Colombia and take a look at the link profile of the pages ranking in the first positions for very competitive terms, those pages will have had a very hard time to rank in the top positions in the US. And I am not talking of link volume here, but about link quality and authoritativeness and share of good and bad links and links that look a little bit manipulated in some cases. So again, but I understand that Google cannot apply the same sort of filters and have the same level of sophistication in the algorithm in every single market, because if they try to do that in Colombia or in Peru or smaller countries, they won't have any sites to rank anymore.
Yeah, it's a great point. Absolutely.
So please, let's start with the fundamentals that I believe that a lot of people misunderstand and then end up wasting a lot of money trying to develop the same sort of projects or developments that they do in the US or in the UK or in their main markets across all of them. And sometimes half of them don't make sense or don't make much sense in these other markets. So it's critical to validate not only from a content localization perspective, but like opportunities based on those specific layers and the search features and level of sophistication and what Google actually is ranking and how Google is displaying in the results there.
Yeah, I actually worked in the Australian market for a bit in SEO, and even there, in certain industries, there's so much less competition than in places like the UK or US, and that means that you can probably get away with more aggressive or spammy tactics that wouldn't work quite so well in the US or in the UK. So look at the SERP, look at the competition from different countries. You also touched upon the Mexican market there as well. So what about writing Spanish? Do you find that a lot of companies just use a generic version of Spanish for every single Spanish-speaking country? And if so, does that turn people off in places like Mexico?
Yes, indeed. And I have to say that a lot still think about, I want to rank in Latin America, right? Without understanding that each Latin American country have their own specific terms and usage of language. In some cases, they are very, very different. In other cases, they are not that much, right? So you can get away with having like a very simplistic targeting if you can, right? Or if you cannot do like a specific country targeting, right? But what it is important is to validate in each specific case. So for example, in again, it depends a lot on the usage of language and your industry, right? For example, if you're in the car rental industry, you pretty much need a specific site for every country, because also the business model, right, is local oriented. So locations and cities are searched along your service or products, and the offering is also will change a lot depending on the local product. And then the funnily enough, like car rental in Spanish, one of those terms that will change in a lot of countries. Carros, autos, coches. Oh my God, there's so many ways to say cars in Spanish because of any reason. I don't know why. But on the other hand, if you are, for example, a project management tool, you don't need necessarily country versions, right? Because it's a SaaS, your product offering won't change per country. You can't personalize and localize certain areas, of course, currency, payment conditions, things like that. But you can do this a little bit on the dynamically on the back end, and also the way that gestión de proyectos or project management search across many of the countries and in Spanish will be the same. But again, it's good luck of the language usage combined along your business model. So you will need to validate in which area you are in the spectrum, right? You can get away even having language versions, or maybe you are in one of those industries and areas where the term change every single time. And because of the nature of your business, you really need localized country-focused versions.
Great thoughts. Motoko, what are your thoughts on another search engine apart from Google, and how that differs in terms of what you've got to do to optimize for it?
The different search engines, I think Baidu and Naver and Yandex too, they kind of trying to update and improve their indexing and search results, what they provide in the search results, to make sure that the results is high quality enough that the people keep using their search engines. And then for that reasons that they start looking at the more, backlinks more than used to, and all those things, they've been updating, and it kind of becoming closer and closer to the Google's algorithm in a way. But what makes difference is really not the search engines, but the users, right? The market, the audience. Like Aleyda was saying that, depending on which country you are targeting, your content doing well in this states or US or in the UK may not do well because the people in the countries are looking at the different keywords, or searching with the different words, or looking for the different characteristic of the certain informations. I think before you even get into that, one of the most frustrating things that us all international SEO experience is having to deal with in the most cases that they take that main country's website, just translate and then copy and then push it out, copy and paste and then push it out. And then really that doesn't work. They expect work from the day one, but that really not cater to the target audience in each countries. They might translate, but they spend all that money and then time, resources to make your main country's website really like a palace, and then put the quality backlinks and the quality content that works well for your main, the country audience. But when you copy and paste and then push it out version of the international websites, they don't even have the backlink from that specific local market, where you are trying to compete with local competitors who has tons of quality links already from local websites, and they know their audience because they're local companies. And then when you're trying to go head to head with those local competitors, your weakness starts show really quickly. And
okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds like more of a cultural understanding and active research within the country, rather than actually understanding technical differences between search engines. Michael,
and the opportunities too, and the opportunities too, because I do believe that there's this, let's say, a little bit of a broad-hand vision that again, search engines in all the countries will behave in a similar, a little bit different, but somewhat similar way that Google. But so, for example, as far as I understand, the last time that I had the opportunity to do a little bit of an interview when I was in China in 2019 or so, with people, with SEOs that are specialized in Naver in South Korea, and then also in Baidu and for China. So, for example, the SEO in China that I was interviewing regarding ranking in Baidu, give me the top critical tips, whatever. And the first tip he was like, please don't rely on SEO, do SEM. Paid search in Baidu, let's be realistic, because you cannot expect to get the type of visibility ranking organically as in Google first. Then on the other hand, people don't only search in Baidu, and there are more and more people who don't rely on Baidu anymore to search that much in China because of, let's say, trust issues, and they will rely much more in the version of Quora that exists in China. It's not Quora, but it's their version. It has its own name. It's a local Q&A platform, so they rely on other people's content. And then a lot of people using WeChat and searching for businesses, and WeChat, a lot of people try to do the comparison with or WhatsApp here in the Western world. And it is a little bit like this, but let's say that WhatsApp provide 20% or less of the functionalities that they do have with WhatsApp provide 10% or so the functionalities that they have with WeChat there. Like when I was in China, I was like, everything is through WeChat, like from scanning QR codes of businesses and looking for them like that. They have profiles or presences like with Facebook pages, and they can buy through them and even pay through them. So a lot of the searches, a lot of the transactions and everything and presence are with WeChat, right? So you can build a pretty good business and there are influencers that are WeChat based. So just to give you an idea, right? So it's very spread out. It's very heterogeneous. It's not like in the US. So people search with Google and then a little bit with Bing and that's it. No, it's very spread out. And the behavior of people searching is a little bit different than what we think of as search engine here, right? It's, as Motoko mentioned, creating presence, because they also behave more of a hub. They are more like a hub. So yes, you need to create presence in their blog network or platforms, because they will have like an area highlighted in search results for them. So imagine having to create a little bit presence in blog posts that is Google owned to be able to be shown in a very specific section in search results in Google. So they have their own snippets. So you need to identify where these snippets are coming from. In a lot of cases, it will come from their own services, but certain features, certain other verticals. And again, especially for China, don't think that you will do much necessarily purely reliant, as far as I have heard from Chinese-based SEOs, purely organic with Baidu, right? Like diversify, use other platforms, mobile apps that they use a lot. And then, of course, unfortunately, also paid search. Because if we think that Google is not necessarily very friendly to SEO sometimes here in the Western world, I won't repeat what they told me about Baidu in China, because I don't want issues. But yes, let's say that it's even less friendly, right?
Aleyda, you started off by talking about perhaps you should consider paid on Baidu, and you just finished off by talking about that as well. Michael, what's your experience with the necessity and strategy behind perhaps actually going in from an international perspective with paid search and SEO hand in hand?
Okay, so there's so much that I wanted to add some additional color on here, and which is totally related to the question as well. So we'll take, let me start with Baidu. Baidu, by the way, they bought the company, the Quora company, like a year ago, Aleyda, and they've incorporated all of those Q&A Quora questions into the results now. So that's a good point that you bring up. So optimize toward Quora. The challenge with Baidu is really speed and hosting. So, getting Chinese hosting is rather difficult. There's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of bureaucracy, government bureaucracy, especially to try to get hosting a domain name there. And if you don't have that, you risk being captured outside of the firewall, which slows your site down. And that is a major factor in ranking on Baidu, is site speed. So that, especially even if the crawler can't even crawl you because of the site speed issue, they're not going to index you. So that's been a huge challenge. There are similarities. They do want fresh content. They want good, relevant content on Baidu to rank well. But, also, what I recommend when it comes to paid on Baidu and organic is, before you even get into organic, do paid on Baidu, just so you can get things to work. Understand the questions, look at your site speed, look at the click-through rate, look at all of these things, and really test out your site and everything before you even attempt to do organic on Baidu with paid. So they go hand in hand. Also with Naver paid and organic is a natural good fit. Yandex, on the other hand, Yandex has really, really good engineers. They do a great job with their technology, great job with their algorithm. It's very impressive. I think if you looked at organically on Yandex, how they regionalize everything. Remember what I said about, I could actually say, what's wrong with my building? Why did the water shut off? That is how good Yandex's technology it is. It will pinpoint exactly where I am, exactly the building I'm in. They'll find exactly the utility company and immediately come back with an answer. If if Google took Yandex's idea and put that into Latin American countries around how Yandex builds their algorithm around each individual region, it would be really impressive, and it would actually probably make life a little bit easier for us international search people. But on Yandex, we don't really see a necessity to do both paid and organic. You can do well in organic. Just remember their indexing is off the chart. You can show for 1 week, you could be gone, the next week you're there, and it's really hard to kind of pinpoint what's wrong because their algorithm changes so much and it's so chaotic. Even they don't even know the rules sometimes.
That's so many wonderful thoughts and kind of great thoughts on obviously the state of search engines around the world. I'd like to touch a little bit upon what SEOs generally have to do technically to sites just to try and ensure that they're likely to appear in search results internationally and just be considered. So maybe if I can go around all of you, just to get a few thoughts on things like, is it necessary to include non-Latin characters in your URLs when you're targeting countries like China, Japan, Korea? Is it possible and necessary to have different domains, for instance, for each country? Is it necessary maybe to go for a subdomain or folder structure, or better to do that? Just other technical thoughts, maybe even touching on things like HREFLANG as well. So we start off with Motoko on that one.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so let's start with the domain. Country specific, Cctld. Yeah, if you can get it, I would recommend you have that. You don't have to have it, but that JP will be good signal to the local audience that as far as that the trust goes, they will think that the company has .co.jp. You have to have the address in Japan in order for you to get that specific address. So trust value will be added to by having that domain. As far as that will help indexing faster or not is a different story. I don't think that will be any difference, but backlinks, you will need the backlinks from Japanese websites in order for you to do well in Japanese search ranking. In addition to have the Japanese website, right, that translated. But if you don't have any other signals to say that this site is designed for Japan, then it's probably hard time ranking well in the search results. Once you translate and then, between the subdomain and the folder, I always like going to folders. But again, it doesn't really matter as far as the indexing goes. So that the domain and the hosting location will be different. The websites that download really quickly in the States can struggle showing up even in a country with high-speed internet available, like in Japan, in South Korea. I've seen that the pages download in 2 seconds in the States takes 15 seconds in Japan.
Is it not possible to go for a decent CDN in Japan, or is it necessarily to go on full-on hosting in Japan?
It depends on what your CDN services is, but you might want to check, make sure that your page is downloading as fast as you think it's doing in Japan. Okay. So that's another thing. Yeah, I see that the many sites, website owners that assume their site is doing well. And then unfortunately, when you use the page speed insights or those tools, it really doesn't show that much of the difference. I don't know why, but it doesn't. You cannot tell the difference between the tools experience and the actual people's experience in those markets. So If you have the office in Japan or Korea or China, have them, actually, tell you that how long it's taking for them to download the page. I've seen many sites that many company, when they ask them, they will tell you, but they're not necessarily communicating that to the headquarters who are managing the website design or hosting or anything like that. So I think it's important to communicate, kind of ask them, hey, is our page downloading okay? Characters in the URLs. For Japan, we use the double byte characters. Some of the websites have the Japanese character domain, Japanese character file names, things like that. It really doesn't have much impact on the SEO wise, the ranking wise. People might think that it might help click-through rates when it's ranked high enough in the search results. The problem is many of the tools, website tools, and analytics tools included, when you try to look at the page data, those double byte characters usually breaks up and you don't know which page anymore on the database. So that's the problem. So, if it's the Japanese companies and then you only have the Japanese website, it might be doable. But for global companies trying to compare the data and then trying, this one product page from how it's doing from UK site to US sites to Japan sites. And then it's hard to compare because Japanese pages, the file name breaks up. So in that case, it's probably just easy to go ahead and use the alphabet, just like in a US file name.
So Aleyda, from your perspective, what are the main technical challenges that international SEOs need to be aware of?
Yeah, I think that the first one is to assume, and many companies unfortunately think it is like that, is that they will pretty much just need to translate the content and add HREFLANG annotations to whatever URL structure that they decide to create for the other countries or language versions, and that will be it. And that's enough, right, from a technical standpoint. First, HREFLANG annotations is not necessarily, I would say, useful in every single use case. It's very handy when you have especially a very strong initial web structure in your initial country or language version that ends up ranking in non-relevant countries or non-relevant languages. So Google, you notify Google which is the page that they should actually show. But this realistically will tend to happen when you are targeting different countries with very similar languages with the same language and then having very similar country content like the US versus the UK or Australia, etc., and then across different countries that speak Spanish, right? So I will say that a lot of people think, oh my God, I need to also add HREFLANG annotations in every single URL. No, you will tend to need to add HREFLANG annotations for your main pages, categories, subcategories, those that will exist across every single markets too. And then all those key very important products that you will tend to have across the different markets, but not in every single URL that sometimes is no index, is canonicalized, and then they will trigger all of these errors in the Google Search Console as a consequence, right? It's a big mess as a consequence. So again, assess if it is really needed to add HREFLANG annotations. If you have these pages with very similar content targeting different countries, different markets, and then prioritize those pages that you are seeing in the Google Search Console or in SEMrush or Href or Systrix that are ranking in the wrong country, right? A US page ranking in the UK or vice versa, things like that. Then on the other hand, potentially like another very big mistake and issue that I see starting when companies are just launching, right, is not thinking if they need to target countries versus languages or understanding that there's no way, unfortunately, to geolocate regions. And as a consequence, they launch a European version or a Latin American version, and then not having a way to geolocate through Google, right? Because .au is not geolocated by default, as many people think, as a domain extension, right? So the best way to do it is to target every single country individually and geolocate. If you are not using a ccTLD for each country, .es for Spain, .fr for France, and so on, then geolocate, create subdirectories, and geolocate, register and geolocate through the Google Search Console, each one of them through the Google Search Console. And that is fundamental, not like the HREFLANG annotation, which is, let's say, if you are running into certain issues, like to give more signals to Google, which is the right page to show in each case. But the geolocation in the Google Search Console, if you're not using a ccTLD, is critical, right? Then on the other hand, regarding what to use, if subdomains, subdirectories, ccTLDs, if you're country targeting, I think that take a look at the SERPs. Check out which are those type of domains that Google is ranking in those countries. You can find things like, oh, there are only ccTLDs ranking in the top positions. Well, it seems that, yeah, there is a lot of prominence and importance given to the geolocation signal in that particular scenario. And then you see the link profile of these pages and you see that, well, they have a few hundred links. They are not necessarily like a global domain with millions of links that you won't be able to catch up with. So if that's the case, go with a ccTLD, because you can see that that is what is actually performing well there. On the other hand, you might go to many markets and see, oh, it is a lot of GTLDs ranked there, GTLDs targeted to those countries, or you will see that there are a lot of global.coms with subdirectories geolocated to those countries ranking very well. And then you realize that they have millions of backlinks pointing to them. So it's not very reasonable for you to try to use a ccTLD that has 0 links and think that you can rank there in less than a year, even if you have the most relevant content, very well optimized in the world for that country, right? So if that's the case, think strategically, do the analysis, and select the web structure that you see that will be much more competitive in those SERPs. Unfortunately, again, these are the SEO, let's say, criteria and best practices and common sense type of thing of validation that you will need to go through. But there are many other legal business sort of restrictions and requirements that you will need to take into consideration. So, for example, if you're working in certain sectors like the financial market, binary options, Forex, whatever, you cannot sometimes use the same domain that you're using to target the US users than the European ones, than the Asian ones and others, because the rules and conditions on privacy concerns and legal concerns are completely different. So there are a lot of restrictions that you also need to take into consideration into the mix, right? But yes, I agree with Motoko that is usually, it tends in, let's say, most of the cases, right, it's important to validate, but in most of the cases, I completely agree with Motoko that leveraging the current GTLD authority to, let's say, fast track your visibility in new markets, leveraging the existing popularity by creating subdirectories that you'll geolocate if you are targeting countries, if you are not targeting languages, then that will take to be in a lot of scenarios the way to move forward in a much more cost-efficient way and fast way.
Super.
Right?
Brilliant stuff. Michael, do you have any technical international SEO thoughts to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, both of them covered a lot. They covered great work. I mean, that was fantastic. So the only thing I would probably add to that, which is not really much of an add, is ccTLDs. So when do you use ccTLDs? Typically, ccTLDs are when you are seriously in the market, right? If I'm Xerox and I'm in France, Xerox.fr, that's going to develop trust. That's going to develop more links, and it'll make it easier for links. There's more authority there because they are a big brand and known in the country, and they take that market very seriously. Where another market, maybe Peru is not a really big market for them, where they don't really need a ccTLD. So it really is your business case of why you would want a ccTLD, but it's not 100% necessary. So that's one thing to remember. And then I will end with one quick story of how bad this can be when you mess up. So we were working with Blizzard, and Hunt family discovered this, and we found that in Latin America, in Peru, all of their Mexican pages were showing up over their Peruvian pages. And we brought it up to them that, hey, you've got a big problem with HREFLANG. And they really just shrugged their shoulders, thinking that, okay, it's not a big deal. We're still getting ranking everywhere. But then they looked at it closer and found out that people in Peru don't buy with Mexican pesos, right? And they lost millions of dollars in potential sales because of things like this. So it's so simple to mess something up by ignoring it than doing things right.
Great thoughts. Great thoughts.
Sorry,
Motoko.
Yeah, just one quick point to that, what Michael just said is, I've seen that the many, things like that happens to many websites. And then problem is that's when the headquarter kind of need to intervene, because when you let that two of the local sites or local markets compete like that, whoever is getting the traffic by showing up in the wrong market, they kind of like getting that traffic, even though it's not converting to their dollars. And then at the same time, the other market, the right market website is losing business because somebody else's site is ranking. So that's when something like that happens, the headquarter sites that team needs to kind of go in and say, we need to use the HREFLANG and make sure that the right page comes up in the right market for, the audience user experience too, not just for the business sake, but yeah.
Wonderful stuff. Look, we've already come to time. The conversation could go on for a long time. I reckon with the next international SEO focus, we've probably got to focus on one country as opposed to international SEO in general. But you shared a lot of value. I appreciate you all coming on here. Let's just finish off by asking you one other quick question each. And then if you share where people can get hold of you online, that would be wonderful as well. So back to you, Aleyda. In terms of a final question, what are some international keyword research tips? Can people, for instance, just use the one tool? Is it important to use a tool that's native to the one country? Any other keyword research tips? And then just after you sharing that, if you just share where people can find you online, please.
Yes, I will say that thankfully nowadays, most of the keyword tools are multi-country, multilingual. SEMrush is fantastic. Href, Systrix, they all have I think that they provide keywords for most of the countries and languages, and so you have a wealth of data there. But of course, what is important is that you validate that those keywords actually are meaningful for you and are relevant for you by having someone who's native to validate them, right? That they have the right intent, and that also these are terms that are actually needed to translate into your language because they are used like this in your industry. So for example, this is an example. One of my clients right now is in the marketing automation sector. So in this case, I'm not only an SEO, but I am a marketer, right? And when I saw how they were translating certain terms in Spanish, like in Spanish, we don't use página de aterrizaje, which is a translation for landing page. We use landing page. When you search in keyword research tools, you will see that página de aterrizaje also has like a minor search volume. So it's actually reflected there. But of course, if they send only this to the linguist, who are not necessarily that much into SEO or marketing, digital marketing, they will translate it like página de aterrizaje. So it was me at that point saying, yes, that term is correct in Spanish, but we marketers don't use it that much. So let's leave the term in English, please, because otherwise it will look very weird. And I will definitely not click on that. So it's important to have this sort of validation for sure, like having someone who might not necessarily be an SEO native in that language, but someone native who knows about that industry well. It's very, very useful. And then, of course, if you want to double check yourself, just go and take a look at which are the top pages ranking for that term in those countries and see if the nature of those pages are similar to yours, are aligned to what you offers, or are pages that don't have anything to do with you. So that term is definitely used in a very different way that you may think it does, right? Even if it is the literal translation.
Great thoughts. And where can people find you online, Aleyda?
At Aleyda in Twitter, aleydasolis.com is my website, or search Aleyda. That is the interesting bit of having like a not so common name. So, and they will see me ranking in the first results. Yes.
Superb stuff. Thanks for coming on. Motoko, your final question. What about translations? Is it possible to create a good user experience at all using machine translations, or is that just nowhere near reality at the moment?
I think it depends on the languages. Maybe from English to Germany, or German or Italian or French might be a little better than trying to translate from English to Japanese, for example. I deal with many websites that translate it from English or foreign or European languages into the Japanese language. And a lot of the time, they said that they didn't use machine translation. They use the translators or translation companies. But even then, the quality is not even close to human. Actually, not translated, but written from the scratch. You know what I mean? The translation, because of the way that the US or English language present the information to the audience, the tone of the voice, or how they approach to the sales pitch, anything like that, any of those will be completely different for them, how the people do business in Japan. So it's not just the translation, the wording mistakes or anything like that, but in addition to that, we need to advise our clients to update the tone of the voice, call to action message. This can be taken as rude for Japanese audience. So usually we may, talk to our audience this way.
Okay, so at least use a final local person to do that final review.
Definitely. Yeah. And the machine translation, because especially for Japanese language, the grammatical structure is completely different. So the machine translation all usually doesn't work for that well for Japanese language. The pronoun and the verb become backwards, or if you say that the pricing from up from $100 or something like that, and it doesn't, the order of the number and from or up to doesn't match in Japanese sentences. So usually, you can do the machine translation as a first draft of the translation, but after that, you definitely need to have the human and a Japanese native person to, fine tuning the sentences. And, yeah.
Great tips. Motoko, where can people find you online?
People can find me on AJPR.com, and I'm also on the Twitter, Motoko Hunt.
Superb. Well, thanks again. Thanks so much for coming on. And finally, Michael, you get the cop-out final question, and that is, what's one thing that we haven't talked about that we should have talked about?
Probably culture. Everybody focuses on language. They focus on technical, and they focus nothing on culture. And I think that's a big miss. Culture is really important when it comes to content. It's important for link building. It's important for finding keywords, important for understanding the audience, and most importantly, it's important for developing trust. So really understanding the culture of the market that you're targeting is really important. Talk to a local, to understand, hey, how is Nicaragua different from Mexico? Can you give me examples and give me, anything like that will really help you understand that more.
Great stuff. Well, thanks so much for joining us as well. Michael pulled over in his car and had to join us remotely because of getting stuck in traffic, but we really appreciate you being part of this as well. So where can people find you online, Michael?
You can find me on LinkedIn. It's in Michael Bonfils, or Twitter at Michael Bonfils. Pretty easy to find me, or even my website, of course, seminternational.com.
Wonderful stuff. Okay, well, I've been your host, David Bain. You can also find me producing podcasts for B2B brands over at castingcred.com. Dixon will be back hosting next month's show on Monday, the 18th of October at 4 p.m. BST, when we'll be focusing on YouTube and podcast SEO. And I'll actually be joining as one of the guests for that one. I'll be joined by Dre De Vera and Mark Asquith. Sign up at theknowledgepanelshow.com to be part of the live audience. Until we meet again, take care. We'll chat again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.